So we know that urban green spaces build community. And when I talk about community, I'm talking about the original Old French origin of that word, which means everybody, a group of citizens. And so what impacts me, impacts you, and we are all in this city doing our work to meet our goals together. And so even though now I'm accustomed to gardening and working in green spaces in urban areas, that's not where I originally grew up. I grew up in Anderson County, Kentucky, about an hour east of Louisville, on a small farm where I gardened with my parents, and we grew the food that came to our table every night. And having that experience as a child really gave me the unique opportunity to be connected to the land and to really have a strong sense of place. And if you think about youth now growing up in urban areas, they don't have this same opportunity to have that sense of connection and are more likely to be connected to an electronic device than they are to the land or growing their own food. But over time, my family moved into more and more urban areas, and by the time I was 16, we were living in Louisville, Kentucky, which has a population in the metro area of over 1 million people. And that is the experience of most Americans, as 80% of us now live in urban areas. And if you live in Louisville, one of the things you're probably familiar with is the 9th Street Divide. And the 9th Street Divide came about as a result of urban renewal policies in the 1960s as a direct reaction to the civil rights movement. And essentially, metro governments and cities around the country implemented policies and regulations to try and ensure segregation remained in their communities despite civil rights. And even though all of those policies were found to be unconstitutional long ago, we still, 50 years later, see the impact of those policies in our city, and the segregation still exists. So this is a map that's just from last year that shows you where Black residents live in Louisville. And you can see that most Black residents in our city live west of the 9th Street Divide or in the South End, and that divide directly ties as well to poverty in our city. So the areas with the highest amount of red on that map are areas of the highest poverty in our city. And so there is this very distinct community divide, and it's also a mental divide. So people in the East End make judgments about the West End, and people in the West End make judgments about the East. And we tend to stay in our separate communities and not work together. And so what does it mean if you live west of the 9th Street Divide, or if you live in the South End? It means you're likely one of 7 residents living in extreme poverty. You're 5 times less likely to have a job, 9 times less likely to have a high school diploma, and the most staggering statistic of all is that you have 12 years less life expectancy just because you live in that side of town. And the reason for that is that there's a direct tie between poverty and quality of place in urban areas. And this is true across America, and it's actually true around the world. So there's a direct lack of green space in the communities of highest poverty in urban areas across the country. And you can see on this map, if you just go west of the I-65 corridor, which divides the east and west ends of Louisville, that there are very few parks on the west side of town. And then if you go east, there's all kinds of parks, and they're very integrated into those spaces, and people have access to all these green spaces. And what that also means is that areas with low green space tend to also not have access to fresh, healthy food. And so we know that West Louisville is also a food desert, and they have lost 4 additional grocery stores in just this past year. And so here are a few more maps that help to illustrate that 9th Street Divide and the difference in the green space on the 2 sides of town. The one is our urban tree canopy, and the areas of lightest green have the lowest amount of heavy tree canopy. So you can see again the lighter colors focused in the West End and the South End. And that directly correlates to the urban heat island effect, where more people tend to die from heat-related mortality as a result of high summer heat because of the low tree canopy, and you can see the higher temperatures that exist in the west and south ends. But we can improve health, and we can improve community through urban green spaces and gardens. So what are all the different ways that these kinds of spaces help to improve community? They improve air quality, water quality, they cool temperatures, they reduce crime. If I'm in my community working in a garden side by side with you, I'm less likely to perpetuate a crime against you in my neighborhood. It also gives me a sense of community pride and community connection, so that I want my community to be safe and I want to work with you and be a partner with you. It's been shown that urban green spaces actually reduce stress. They have a very high positive impact on mental health and psychological health. They increase property value, and they also help to produce food in areas that need it the most and give space for gardens. And there's a long-term impact that comes from urban green spaces. So while some life changes, like a new job or making more money, might give you short-term improved quality of life, urban green spaces have actually been shown to have a long-term permanent impact on mental and psychological health and happiness. But there's always a catch. So we can't just go out and build the most elaborate and amazing green spaces and fill up every vacant lot. There was a study that came out in the Urban Landscape and Planning Journal in 2014, and they talk about creating spaces that are just green enough. And one of the things that they found in their studies is, and this was around the world actually, that you could overdevelop green space, go beyond the means of the community, and then what would ultimately happen was gentrification. And so if you build too much beyond the community's needs and you don't meet their specific needs, then people would move in from another community, push out those people living in poverty you were trying to help, and the cycle continues to perpetuate over and over again. So what they found was just green enough that met communities' needs most often were community gardens, food forests, and spaces for urban agriculture for people to buy and sell their own food. So knowing this, I started to think about places that I had traveled and been where there was a very strong sense of connection to the land, but also a very strong sense of community connection, and where people were brought together by green spaces. And I was in Bali, Indonesia a couple of years ago, and I've never seen a culture that is so interconnected and loving and supportive and welcoming. And they are such a happy people despite living in what we would consider poverty. And the way that they live are in these traditional family compounds, and these are all open courtyard spaces. So imagine living in the outdoors 24/7 with just a couple of rooms with roofs, walls, and doors where you would sleep at night. But the whole rest of your living space is an outdoor courtyard space that's intentionally created for community gathering and for social events. And then the rest of that space being dedicated to food production. So gardens, a kitchen, a rice granary, chicken coops, all are within the walls of the home. And so these are a couple of photos from my trip. And the one on the right, that is actually a woman standing in what is essentially her living room. And you can see the edge of their family compound and that open wall for their courtyard home right there behind her. And she's standing in the middle of all these different varieties of ginger and turmeric, and she's just steps away from her kitchen and the community gathering space where they will host 150 to 200 people from their village regularly to gather community. And so how do you translate that kind of concept into an urban area in America? So from a simple design concept for gardens, you would just create that same kind of concept where you put a kind of safe space by creating a barrier wall with green materials around the edges of a vacant lot. You can do that with trellises, with vining plants that produce food, with pollinator plants, with trees. You then want to create a community gathering space for people to get together and spend time to build community. You set that back away from the street to create a sense of safety, and then you create tons of space for people to grow their own food together and to build community around a garden. And so you heal the land through the use of creating and developing gardens in what were previous vacant spots. And when you heal the land, you heal yourself, and ultimately you heal community. And when I say community, again, I go back to that original old French of the definition of everybody and all of us working together across the community and across community divides. And so let me tell you about a couple of examples of how Louisville Grows does this work. One of our projects is the People's Garden, which is in Shawnee. It's in the far end of the city, up near the Ohio River. And we have 5 acres where we have a community garden, food forest, a woodland garden, and community gathering space around a fire pit. One of the unique things that we have on this property is 6,000 square feet of greenhouse space. And in that space, we produce food-bearing plants and sell those back to the community at cost. So you can buy 6 tomato plants for $3 that can produce easily over 120 tomatoes. And that $3 can come from your SNAP or food stamp benefits, so you can use that to help grow your own food. Another very successful program we have is Love Louisville Trees. Love Louisville Trees has planted over 1,800 trees in the last 3.5 years in our community, and that is with the help of our citizen foresters, who are trained volunteers who go out and lead the community in planting trees in their own neighborhoods. And so we have anywhere from 150 to 200 volunteers come out for each of these events, and it's really a tremendous thing to experience. And one of the things that makes our program unique is that we actually plant on private land. So if we're in your neighborhood and you want a tree in your front yard or backyard, we'll plant a tree there. And so while we're directly addressing the issue of tree canopy loss in the city, we're also helping to improve the value of properties for the people living in those neighborhoods. Another example of a recent project of ours is the Hope Farm and South Point's Community Garden and Food Forest. And if you haven't heard of the Iroquois Housing Project, it was one of the highest crime areas in the city of Louisville. And in 2009, Louisville Metro Housing made the decision to tear down those former housing projects. And that land had been sitting vacant for all those years, since 2009. And last year we started a refugee training farm on that space, and we now have space for 45 refugee families, and they grow food for their community and food for their families. And just 2 weeks ago, we installed the South Point's Community Garden and Food Forest, and that's for residents living in and around that neighborhood. And they have now 66 fruit trees that we installed and 50 berry vines that we installed, and they have over 20 families who've committed so far to the community garden for their first year. And so that's a great place to go in and build green space in urban communities, is vacant lots. And so the Hope Farm we leased from the city, but on occasion we actually purchase vacant lots as well and turn those around into food forests and community gardens. And we do that side by side with the communities to determine what they need and how to best facilitate that. So 2/3 of vacant properties in Louisville are west of the 9th Street divide. So again, there's that divide that is very reflective of urban green space and a lack of care for the land. And so this map actually only reflects 500 vacant properties that are controlled by Metro Louisville, but there's actually 6,000 to 7,000 vacant properties in the city. So if you can imagine what that map would look like if all of those were reflected. And if you have 6,000 vacant lots, if only 1% of those actually became gardens and green spaces, that's only 60 gardens, but that would produce over 120,000 pounds of fresh food for the local communities. And so how can you make this happen for your community? You have to participate and get out there. So you have to work in the community and side by side with organizations who know that community and who are supporting that community. So nonprofits, churches, community groups are all great organizations to work with. If you don't have time to volunteer, you can always support those organizations through funds or by attending educational events. You have to connect with the community. You have to be present. So put down your cell phones. This is not connection, but this is connection, being here with you, present and experiencing. You have to be authentic and real. If you're going into work in another community across town, be sure to be present, authentic, and real, and ask questions and listen and engage. In order to identify community needs, and remember when we talked about just green enough, you have to meet community needs to make sure the space you're developing is just green enough, but not going beyond their means so far as to push them out of that community. And in order to identify their needs, You have to listen and ask questions. You have to work in solidarity with communities side by side, and they have to have buy-in from the very beginning for long-term sustainability of projects. And then ultimately, you have to provide support for those communities, ongoing support. So the way we do that at Louisville Grows, we're a staff of only 12 people. We have projects all over the West and South Ends, and we have trained citizen forester and citizen gardener volunteers. So I talked about citizen foresters going out and leading groups of people in their neighborhoods to plant trees. And this year we started a citizen gardener program that goes out and helps people grow their own food in their community. And so again, if you think of that old French definition of community, everybody or a group of citizens. So we've trained groups of citizens to go out and support their community. And so I can't get through this without mentioning my favorite Louisvillian, or everybody's favorite Louisvillian, Muhammad Ali. And this quote is perfect for the type of work that I've been doing for a long time, and that service to others is the rent you pay for your room here on earth. And so I encourage you to get out, to push beyond your limits, to go to the side of town that maybe you haven't been to before, and really work to serve all of the community. And one of my favorite projects and how I first really got involved in urban agriculture is the Community Green School in the California neighborhood. And about 4 years ago, a couple of friends and I were invited to help develop an after-school program for kids to teach them how to garden and how to cook their own food. And we had this tremendous group of kids, and there was this one little boy, he's not pictured here, who was about 6 years old, and he was so full of energy and bouncing around all over the place and just always just rambunctious. And we were out on the playground and getting ready to take the kids into the garden to help them plant cold weather crops. And I had my little packs of cabbage plants, and I, had him on the playground. He's throwing anything that was not attached to the ground, and he was just extra energetic that day. And we walk over into the threshold of the garden, and there's kind of immediately a little bit of a calming effect. And I talked to him about this plant. It's a baby. It's these tiny, delicate roots, but it's going to grow up big and strong and give you food to eat. And he was very entranced, and he took the cabbage plant from me, and he bent down, put it in the ground, tapped it down the soil, and he said, "It's okay, baby, it's okay." And that same little boy, months from then, was watering and weeding, and he was so involved in that garden. And when a kid in an urban food desert can grow food a block from his home, and a few months later, that same kid who didn't want to eat a green vegetable was eating cabbage with a smile on his face. That's connection, and that's building community. So I hope that inspires you to get out there and get growing. Thank you.